So like you, I'm passionate about people analytics, and we want to do the best job that we can for our business. I think the challenge is we don't always get funded or resourced the way that we need in order to be able to do what we know we can do and what the business says that they want us to do. We therefore have to engage in some salesmanship. We have to be able to make a business case for our vision, the resources that we're going to need, and why it matters, why it's important for the business. So our goal in our conversation this morning is to talk a bit about the process of getting that business case put together. How do you win the funding and the resource? How do you create a compelling strategy? What should that strategy look like? And what are some of the roadblocks that might pop up that keeps you from getting what you need? Now, I fully appreciate in this room, we have folks representing organizations at all sorts of ends of a spectrum of maturity. Some organizations have data lakes and they have well thought out processes that support democratization of data, and that's awesome. Others are manually pulling data out of systems, mashing those together, creating those month-end or quarterly reports manually, and they have proven the value of people analytics, but they're just not able maybe to do it at speed and scale like they would like to do. They maybe lack the technology or the headcount to get that done. So our conversation today is going to drive some thought around how do you position a strategy, what should your strategy look like, how do you get that funding, and everybody will take something away, hopefully, that they can use. We live in what I call the people analytics incongruity. Our business leaders and our HR leaders say, wow, we want to be able to do predictive modeling. We want to use AI. We want. Yet we're not necessarily funded or resourced appropriately. We might not have all the technology or headcount that we need. Businesses and our business leaders want us to build skyscrapers. They have great expectations about what can be done, yet this is our tool shed. We have old tools, and it's like, well, it's hard for me to build some of those skyscrapers with what I have. I'll do the best I can, prove the value to you, and then let's talk about maybe getting some better equipment here. So how do we go about convincing them? How do you convince the business to make that investment? We have to tie it back to what the business needs. We have to figure out how to sell our vision internally so that we can do what we know they want us to do and what we know is going to be best for the business. We need to bridge that gap between expectations and funding reality. Let's talk about a three-step framework to driving this conversation and getting there. We're going to start with navigating the politics of the situation. Then we're going to move into justifying the investment. That's our business case. And then we want to push for the right solution. You don't want to make all of this effort only to get saddled with something that doesn't work. And we'll talk about why that could even be possible. Let's start off with that political element, if you will. There's a power landscape around you. There's going to be a variety of different players involved in the decision-making process. You have stakeholders. Now, what's interesting is that the stakeholders are moving out of just being recipients, if you will, to being a part of the decision-making process. Sapient Research reported a 30% increase in the past 2 years of IT owning HR tech procurement. Now, is that a problem? Well, it could be a problem if they're making a decision about the platform or tools or resources that you're going to have in order to build those skyscrapers. A group that isn't on the hook, so to speak, to deliver is making the decision about the tool set that you're going to have or what that's going to look like. So our stakeholders aren't just process gatekeepers. They're actually influencing the decision-making process. So it's all the more important for us to demonstrate ourselves as experts who have a clear vision and a clear understanding of what we need to get there. That's what we have to drive towards. We have to resolve that incongruency between who's making the decision and who's actually using the tool. In that power landscape, we're going to have people who differ in terms of their power and influence, as well as how much they're interested in your project. There's going to be folks who are all over this map, so to speak. And you're going to have to interact with these folks a little bit differently depending on where they are. I think one of the themes I would like to throw out there is regardless of where you think they are in that power or influence, communicate with everybody. Get their input and insights. Just because somebody is maybe tucked away in that lower left corner doesn't mean that they're not going to pop up and influence somebody who's in the upper right corner. So understanding that landscape is going to be important if you're going to successfully influence the business here. Who are your stakeholders? Who is it that you are beholden to, that you have to deliver results for? Understand who they are and their teams. And this is kind of an interesting and sometimes delicate situation. Does that team get along with your team? Is there history there? Are there teams who don't think you're able or equipped to deliver people analytics? Do they think they could do it better than you? Or do they see you as an expert? We need to assess our relationships honestly. We need to understand, how do I best communicate with these folks? How do I keep them involved and engaged? How do I hear them, but also, again, control the flow, control the narrative? So when we get into making this a reality, we have to reach out and relate with everybody. Change management doesn't start when we get that buy-in. That's great when we get buy-in. But it starts when we have those conversations with those individuals. And those individuals are going to talk to other individuals. Keep that in mind. One story that we heard was a people analytics leader at a large organization was making the case for people analytics solution, right? The funding for headcount, the funding for technology. She thought she had her bases covered. She had talked to all the stakeholders. She got everybody involved. They go into the final funding meeting. Somebody raises their hand and says, "This is the first time I'm hearing of this. I need to know more." Vetoed the funding, delayed the project by 12 months. The leader had thought she covered her bases, but she missed somebody. It just goes to show we want to touch everybody in this orbit, everybody that's going to have some sort of say or influence. Be nice to them, and we want to have conversations with them, understand their concerns, their needs, what they see as a good outcome. So we need to move into our let's justify the investment stage of this process. We need to make a business case, and when we make that business case, we need to speak in a way that the business cares about. Regardless of what your ultimate strategy is going to be, you know you're going to need technology and you're going to need headcount if you're going to do people analytics at speed and scale. A lack of technology means you're likely going to be using your precious headcount to do what? Manually mash stuff. That's not scalable. It's not sustainable for mid-large size organizations for sure. So we have to make that compelling argument that a significant investment in technology pays off dividends. How do we go about doing that? We need to speak in their language. Why do you need more resources? It's all about how we frame the issue. If you frame the issue as, well, it's really tough to do this stuff. My team, it's really hard on them. It takes a lot of work to pull all that data together. Instead of framing it from that perspective, frame it from the perspective that says, you know what? The business needs us to provide insights really quickly. Technology is going to allow us to do that with speed, scale, and accuracy. The business thrives on speed, scale, accuracy. They also thrive on reducing risk. And they need insights. Frame the issue in those terms, not in terms of how your team is going to interact with the platform, but how the platform supports the business. When we talk about procuring funding for headcount and technology, it's easy to think about the cost of the solution. But there's a real non-zero cost of not moving forward. Sitting and doing nothing has real consequences. We need to lean into this and create a little bit of tension around that. For example, we know that if we can't deliver at speed or scale, that's a challenge. There are data risk. If people are putting data on their computers out there because you're working off of spreadsheets, lack of governance is how you end up with finance going, well, our headcount numbers are different than yours. Why is that? And that's like, as a PA leader, you're like, well, I don't know. How did you calculate what you did? I can't tell you that. But we end up with different numbers going out or incorrect numbers. People misusing, not because they're trying to, but because they just don't know any better, numbers and producing results that just cause you more challenge. And then those are missed opportunities. I think one of the things I've learned kind of, being in the HR end of analytics and writing stuff up is the business will make a decision whether or not you show up to the table. If you can show up to the table with interesting information that's going to help improve that decision, they will factor it in. But they're not going to wait. We have to be able to do these things at speed and scale. Again, we want to create some emotional tension around not acting. Sort of fear of missing out or, wow, the fear of not doing the right thing. So let's move into our third pillar, pushing for the right solution. If you push for the wrong solution, I'm not so sure that you're any better off. You want to make sure that you get the right solution in place. You're going to have to present a winning, compelling strategy if you're going to get that funding. Now, I'm going to say something that might be a little bit controversial. Dashboards themselves are not the solution. And I know I'm picking on dashboards here because it seems to be a focal point for many PA organizations. Why? It's tangible. The stakeholders tend to like them. It's something that you can show people. But is that really what we need? Do we just need a dashboard vending machine and then say, okay, we're done? It's fair to ask, if I'm saying dashboards aren't the solution, what is a solution? We need a repeatable system for producing decision-ready insights. And that system involves people, it involves process, it involves data, it involves analysis, it involves a variety of things. It's not just one thing. But again, the solution is not throwing out a bunch of visualizations and saying, okay, figure it out. The solution is supporting good insights that will help drive decisions. These insights begin with business questions. If there's no question, there's no insight to be had. If there's nothing framing what you're looking at, then you're just looking at stuff without a way to use it, basically. What does this system look like? Well, it starts with that business question. We then need to create an evaluation plan. We need to, before we start looking at a bunch of numbers, potentially, we need to say, well, here's my question. What do I need to be able to see? If I see a certain pattern, then I will conclude this about the question. We need to frame that out ahead of time. That is going to lead us to certain analyses. Now, some of those analyses are going to be tables driven, right? I'm going to look at certain numbers. They might be statistical analyses. It might be modeling. It might be looking at visualizations. And visualizations are what? Just a graphical way of representing data that's in the table. We're then going to apply some reasoning to that analysis so that we can make heads and tails of it. Does it make sense? Are the conclusions that I'm drawing reasonable? How do I know that what I'm seeing and what I'm concluding is the right conclusion, or is there another alternative explanation that might even be better? We want to be open-minded about this because when we are, we end up with an insight. We end up with, aha, this is what's going on, therefore, we've answered a business question and we can decide what we want to do, if anything, to take action. So insights are produced, they're not displayed. Insights require reasoning, not just rendering. And dashboards are often going to answer questions that no one is asking. It's kind of backing into the answer as opposed to seeking out the answer. So a reasonable question is, how do we get there? What do we need to do to be able to support such a system? And again, it's going to involve technology, it's going to involve people, it's going to involve process. It's not a single, silver bullet sort of thing. Well, we need to start with robust data. It needs to be pulled together, ideally automated. We can lay analytics that are going to be reliable on top of that. And then we can do what I call nudge questions. We can nudge people to think about those business issues in a certain way. And then in that, we can support them with answers to those questions, helping them go through that process of digesting information and encourage additional data exploration. The additional data exploration is going to help our partners come up with additional questions. I've never done a study where at the end of the study I wrote, I have finally solved this. Nobody else needs to do anything more about this. If you've ever published, like in the academic journals, you know, what's the last part of your journal article? It's, and we think additional study ought to be done over here, right? You always end up with more questions than you answer, it seems. One of the hardest things that I dealt with as a people analytics leader was getting my partners to think about good business questions. And I realized it's just a lot of folks, especially in HR, have a different way of approaching the world, and they don't necessarily ask the same sorts of questions that a people analytics team would ask. The decisions that you make today are going to set the trajectory of where your people analytics team is going to be tomorrow. And I think that's even more important now as AI starts ramping up. What is people analytics going to look like in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years? I don't know, but I don't think it's going to look like what it looks like today. And I bet that there's a lot of conversation that's going to be had over the next couple of days about that particular issue. You don't want to go through this process only to get saddled with something that's going to lower your trajectory. You want to make sure that you get the right solution in place. One thing I know for sure is people will change, businesses will change, products will change. What won't go out of style is having data brought together in a reliable fashion, modeled so that you can use it. Whether it's AI using it or people using it or a combination thereof, having your data in one place done right is going to always be a winner. There are 3 big issues that we've seen derail people analytics teams on their journeys towards getting their function set up properly, especially when they start talking about procurement or headcount or things of that nature. Number 1 is the IT detour. IT can build it. You say, hey, I need a place to get all my data, and it needs to be automated, and I need to be able to then be able to visualize it and so forth. IT comes along and says, oh, we can do that. Maybe they can, but there's a lot of nuance to HR data that makes it difficult for IT teams, in what I've seen and personally experienced, to be able to do it properly. And then you have downstream maintenance and management of that. That's also challenging. Hey, I need a new data set. How long is that going to take, and how much is it going to cost me? I need a new visualization or storyboard for somebody. How long is that going to take? The other is your CHRO looks at you and goes, can't the HRIS do it? I just spent 7 figures on a new HRIS platform. And HRIS platforms are great at collecting data, events, transactions, but they're not necessarily designed to support some of the deeper analyses that we need, or they might not be flexible enough to accommodate external non-HR data. At the end of the day, if we're not linking business data with our HR data, we're missing value. We're leaving value on the table. And then finally, you get the shiny object trap. You get stakeholders who don't have to use the tool on a regular basis, making great influence on what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, even though they're not responsible for delivering people analytics insights. They get drawn to something that maybe on the surface looks interesting or good, but it isn't going to do what you need it to do. Logic informs and emotion compels. We have to tap into the emotional component with our leadership. We have to create some tension for them. If we don't do something, we run ourselves open to risk. If we do something here, we want to do it right so that we are set for the next 3, 5, 7 years. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring in terms of new technologies, but we do know certain fundamentals will always be in style, so to speak. We have to control the narrative. The narrative is not, this is a nice tool for HR to have to make life easier. The narrative is, this technology this team is here to support the business making better decisions. We have to lean into that HR is about supporting the business. It's not just about cranking out numbers, so to speak. So let's talk about a practical checklist for action. What are you going, if you find yourself that you want to do this, what do you need to do? Well, step number one is develop your overall strategy. Listen to your stakeholders. Identify what their needs are, what they're concerned about. At the end of the day, what is it that they want to be able to do and achieve? Start having those conversations. Start building your business case. Test it out with trusted partners. Justify the investment. You're asking somebody to spend a lot of money both now and going into the future. We want to tie that investment back to what the business is going to get for it. We want to, again, tap into the if we don't do anything, we're going to fall behind. And then finally, we have to champion the right solution. And I think part of being successful at that is establishing yourself as an expert in the domain with the best interest of the business in mind. And I think that last part is key. It's not about making life easier for me. It's about solving your problems and helping you drive the business, make better decisions. So we know that we have this continuum. And for organizations starting their journey, you start with those spreadsheets. You manually are doing things. It takes a long time. I get it. But you're showing the value of people analytics. So all the work that you're doing today helps you really understand your data, the process, and it helps you understand how things could be better. But it also gives you an opportunity to show leaders that people analytics can have a positive impact. And then as you migrate along, the goal is to get to a strategic platform that's not just technology-driven. It's process-driven. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of supporting. It's a way of nudging people to think about issues in a slightly different way. And if we can make that case, we're more likely to get the support, resources, and funding that we need. And then it's all a matter of implementing and delivering. I really, really like talking about this stuff. I hope we get an opportunity to talk a little bit more. Find me, grab me, heckle me, whatever it is. And I look forward to meeting with you. Thanks.